Okay, let's start this final session. And again, we'll start with a meditation. And this retreat, of course, has been the Shamatha retreat based on mindfulness of breathing using the breath as the object. And we've gone through a number of variations of this mindfulness of breathing practice. One was to observe the full body breath practice, observe sensations anywhere in the body associated with the breathing. Similar to that, observing the rhythm of the breath, both of those very good for relaxation. Then we turned our attention to observing the rising and falling of the abdomen, so focusing on the area of the abdomen, good for stability. And then lastly, we looked at the mindfulness of breathing practice, focusing at the entrance of the nostrils, particularly good for clarity. So in this meditation session, you get to choose any one of those variations of the mindfulness of breathing practice. And of course, with whatever variation you're using, remember the basis of relaxation, to not lose that relaxation regardless of the object, the variation of the breath practice that you're doing. So let's do that practice now. As always, we begin by preparing the body. Setting it into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. And using the out breath to relax and release any tightness or tension in any part of the body. And relaxing more deeply with each out breath. Allowing the breathing to flow naturally and effortlessly. And with each out breath, happily releasing any thoughts that may have arisen. And allowing the mind to come to rest. Resting in the present moment. Resting in that stillness of awareness. And from that basis of a relaxed body and a relaxed mind, from that basis of stillness, bring your attention to the sensations of the breath, either the full body, the rhythm, the abdomen, or the nostrils. So choose whichever variation of the breath practice you prefer for this session. And maintaining an ongoing flow of mindfulness of the sensations of the breath throughout the entire cycle of each in and out breath. And monitoring the mindfulness with introspection. Noticing if the mind is becoming dull or distracted. And then adjusting the focus accordingly. And we can bring the meditation to a close. Few topics we'll be covering in this session. First, we'll look at some general advice, then how to set up our day in a good way. The meditation is building a vision for this life. So talked a lot about framework for this shamatha practice. So how to have a vision for our life to support this sort of practice. And then top 5 regrets that people tend to have about their life. Q&A, and then a little bit of a preview of the upcoming retreats, the 4 further retreats in this series. So first, some general advice, a couple of points to cover here. First, again, this idea of a supporting framework, that if we really want to do this shamatha practice, this mindfulness of breathing practice, it's important to have a framework and not just sort of add a little bit of mindfulness into whatever we're doing now without a framework. So we end up with what's being sometimes termed mindfulness, like McDonald's. So it's like a mindfulness that it's like fast food. It's not very effective. And so part of that framework, setting up a healthy framework for this practice is, as I've mentioned a number of times already, is shifting our worldview. That as long as we have this worldview that the source of our happiness and suffering is out there in the world, we're just going to be chasing after pleasure and trying to avoid unpleasant situations. And then adding a little bit of mindfulness to that, it's not going to be very effective. In fact, it could simply just amplify our dysfunctional lifestyle. Rather, if we can understand that the real genuine source of happiness and suffering lies within our own mind, and then that this shamatha practice, mindfulness of breathing, shamatha practice, is a gateway to that genuine happiness, then we have a good start to have a good framework for this shamatha practice. And then we can really shift our priorities in life, stop chasing after all those pleasures out there and devote time to developing ourselves to this state of inner well-being. So then we can really simplify our life. We can have time for meditation and more meaningful activities. And then, of course, as part of a framework, then we have this idea of protecting and nurturing. This came up a little bit in the last session. I'd like to add a little bit more now. And we can use the analogy of a sprout. That if we plant some seeds in the ground and they start to sprout, and we want those sprouts to grow into big, healthy bushes or trees, then really we need to do at least 2 things. We need to protect and we need to nurture. If we don't protect, then either they'll get eaten or trodden on. And if we don't nurture, they won't really develop and grow. So similarly for us, if some ideas have sprouted in our mind, if we want them to grow and to transform our life, we need to protect and nurture. So to protect is a little bit here, is to avoid any heavy negative situations. Maybe there's situations or people that whenever we go into these situations, we always get influenced in a very negative way because we tend to easily influenced. So to really protect ourselves from these heavy negative influences, particularly as a beginner when we're not very strong-minded and easily led astray. So to protect ourselves and to nurture. And so this came up a little bit in the last session. One of the questions is that to nurture these ideas, then like adding water and fertilizer, then we need to have support. We need to find these like-minded people to help support us, to nurture us, and to also, if we can have some sort of teacher or something that can give us some good guidance as well, that this is really going to help nurture us in the practice. And I like to talk a little bit more about that nurturing a little bit later in the session as well. But I can't really overemphasize this importance of finding these like-minded people. I know from my own experience, when I did a few courses on Buddhism in, I think, Nepal and India many years ago. And then I went back to Australia and I wanted to really transform my life. But I was really in a place, I was on my own. There were no like-minded people, no Buddhist centers. So even though I really wanted to meditate and transform my life, basically what happened was nothing. In fact, I just got swept up in my old habits. So even though I wanted to meditate and transform, then nothing really happened. I just got swept up in my old habits. So basically 2 years, nothing happened. It was only after 2 years that I found myself in a different environment where there were some like-minded people that I started to manage to meditate a little bit and implement these ideas and really transform my life in a more meaningful direction. And here often then, sometimes people feel like it's a choice that, you know, either I have to do my career thing or I do the spiritual thing. So which one should I do? And so when people hear about this idea of developing themselves and meditating and stuff, they think, oh, I need to do a spiritual life now. So I need to abandon my career, give it away and be something spiritual, go off and maybe sit in a cave for 10 years or something and meditate. I think this is a completely wrong way of thinking. Because if we abandon our career, then one, how are we going to financially support ourselves? And two, if that's the one thing we're good at, how are we going to benefit the world if we've given that up? So rather, we need to integrate those two. So to use these ideas to make your career more meaningful. It's not about the career. Again, if we have this worldview, the source of happiness is out there, then the career will often be about what can I get in terms of prestige and money and wealth and position and fame and so forth. And then we're never going to be satisfied, no matter how much money and prestige and fame we have. Rather, if we have the view of genuine happiness, inner well-being, then it's more about what we can bring to the world. And then we can have a very simple job and really it can be very meaningful because we're bringing something to the world rather than what we can get from the world. So I think this is a better way of looking at it. And so then in terms of having a framework, we don't have to abandon our career. We can simply shift our perspectives and then use that as part of the framework for leading a more meaningful life. And the other point I wanted to look at in terms of general advice is making effort. So like everything in our life, if we want to become good at something, we need to make effort. So likewise here, if we're training the mind, it requires effort. But here, when we talk about using the word effort, certainly in Buddhism, the word effort, or what's translated as the word effort, is defined as a mind that delights in virtue, which means it's a mind that's happy to do good things. So if we're happy to do something, it becomes really easy to do it. So therefore, it's very important in all this training the mind and meditation to maintain a joyful mind, understanding the benefits of what we're doing, and not see this as some sort of hardship that we have to endure, because then we've completely missed the point. And then we're not really going to make any progress. We're just going to give up because it's a hardship. Why am I doing this? And of course, key to progress is continuity. So if we're training the mind on a daily basis, meaning a daily meditation practice, and then integrating those things we meditate on in daily life as well. So continually training the mind. And in addition to that, what can be very helpful is on a regular basis, maybe every year, to go to a meditation retreat for 5 days or a week or so forth, or even 10 days, because there, it can really, in a very condensed short time, it can really give a boost to our practice, and we can get a lot of inspiration because there'll probably be other people there trying to do the same thing as well. So these sort of annual retreats is like a sort of giving us a boost in our practice. So I very much recommend that. So maybe instead of 2 weeks at the beach on your holiday, maybe you have 1 week on the beach and 1 week doing a meditation retreat. And another point here in terms of making effort is to avoid unrealistic expectations. A number of unrealistic expectations that come up. One is that often people feel like when they gather a little bit of new knowledge, you know, these ideas, some of these ideas, that somehow their life will automatically be transformed. It won't be, because our behavior is not driven by our intellectual understanding. Our behavior is driven by our instinctive habits. And so if we really want to transform our life, we need to transform our habits. So we need to bring these ideas into reality, to integrate them, to internalize them and integrate into our daily life. Then things will start to change in our life. And then also another unrealistic expectation sometimes people feel is that you know, each day and each week my practice should get a little bit better every day. So they think that it's going to go like this. But actually that's that never really happens like that. Is that in the short term, particularly in terms of meditation practice, there's a lot of ups and downs. And so we need to have really adopting a long-term perspective. Over the long term, we should notice some improvement. In the short term, there will be a lot of ups and downs, because some days our minds are naturally more quiet. Some days naturally our mind is much more agitated and disturbed and so forth. So short term, there'll be a lot of variation, but in the longer term, then we will notice some improvement. So have a long-term perspective. And then also when we're faced with difficult situations in our life, to maintain that joyful state of mind. And one way we can do that, of course, is to see difficult situations not as problems or obstacles, but as opportunities. And if we really look at our life at the times where we most progressed as a person in our life, most developed as a person, it's often on the basis of having faced some challenge or difficulty in our life. If we're never challenged in our life, we never face difficulties, we don't tend to really develop as a person. We just sort of float along and don't really develop. It's only when we're challenged that we really develop. So when we're faced with difficult situations, to really see this as an opportunity to develop as a person, rather than as a problem or obstacle. Because seeing it as a problem or obstacle, we're just going to have aversion, and then we're just going to magnify the difficulty of the situation. So that's two pieces of advice in terms of general advice. Next topic then is how to structure our day, how to set up our day in a meaningful way. Of course, very good always to start the day with a very good motivation. So here's one that I particularly like. This is from the Dalai Lama, and he says, every day, think as you wake up, I'm going to benefit others as much as I can. So I think if we can really cultivate that motivation every morning, then we're setting ourselves up to start in a very good direction in the day, to really have that expansive, positive motivation. And then in terms of a daily meditation practice, very much recommended to do that first thing in the morning, generally because that's where it's most quiet, a good way to start the day and so forth, and we can dedicate a little bit of time. And initially, I think it's very helpful to pick a time that works for you and stick to that time. Because one of the most challenging things initially is to simply develop the habit. And if we're meditating at different times in different days, we're not really developing a habit. Whereas if we pick a time and stick to that time, then we start to develop a habit. And once we've developed a habit that this particular time we meditate each day, then it becomes easier. And of course, quality over quantity. So particularly as a beginner, if we try and meditate too long, it'll be too difficult. We may be able to sustain it for a week or 10 days, and then we'll just give up because it's too difficult. So start short. Quality over quantity. Start by developing the habit, and then as we get deeper into the practice, we can start to expand the amount of time we meditate. What to meditate on? Of course, in this retreat, we're focusing on the shamatha practice, the concentration practice, and in particular, we're focused on the mindfulness of breathing. So I think for many of us, that's actually a very good place to start in the shamatha practice and in the mindfulness of breathing. And we had those variations of full body, rhythm, abdomen, nostrils. And in the next retreat, of course, we're going to do more shamatha practice. And there we're going to be looking at the mind and the resting in awareness practice. So some people actually prefer to use those objects. And so when we do that retreat, we'll see whether you find that that's a better object to use. But I think for now, we can't go astray can't go wrong in terms of using the mindfulness of breathing as a shamatha practice. And particularly initially, I think that's a good practice to really emphasize in the morning meditation session that we have, particularly if our attention skills are not very well developed. But as I mentioned briefly earlier, I think it's very helpful to have very important, in fact, to have a very integrated approach in terms of our meditation practice. Just like to have a healthy diet, we often talk about the 3 main food groups and so forth, to have a healthy, balanced diet. Similarly here, in terms of meditation practice, to have a healthy, balanced meditation practice, we have these different food groups. And here we can really talk about 3 main food groups in terms of meditation. The shamatha, to develop this calm, clear, focused mind. And then on that basis, the 2 main other elements of wisdom and compassion. And they're the 2 elements that we're going to be looking at in the last 3 retreats in this series of 5 retreats. So then after the end of the 5 retreats, we'll have all the various practices then that we can put together in a very balanced way. And later in those retreats, I'll talk about how we can balance those various elements of the shamatha, the vipassana, and the compassion. But just mentioning here that it would be good to add some compassion and vipassana. But of course, at the moment, we're simply engaging in the shamatha practice. And then for all practices, of course, meditation plus integrating in the day. So here, of course, the main tool we're using in shamatha practice is mindfulness. And so then to continue the shamatha practice in the day, one thing to do there, of course, is to continue to cultivate mindfulness through the day. We could simply say at the beginning of every day, I'm going to be as mindful as possible throughout the day. And then probably after 5 minutes, we've forgotten that. So rather to use triggers throughout the day to help us to seed the day with mindfulness. And these triggers can take on a number of different forms. One is if we notice any tension in the body or the mind, then just stop whatever we're doing and then do a little mindfulness exercise, maybe focus on the breath for 3 breaths. Another trigger can be certain physical actions that we do regularly each day, such as eating meals, brushing teeth, and so forth. And then in those physical activities, then make a determined effort to be fully present in that activity, to be focusing on brushing your teeth when you're brushing your teeth, not be thinking about all the things we have to do later in the day, to be fully present with mindfulness. And then, of course, we can use modern technology. There are a number of apps that can really help, that send a little bell or something at intervals throughout the day. One app is, I think, called Mindfulness Bell, which we can program that give a little signal at regular intervals. When it does, stop whatever you do, and then do a little mindfulness exercise. Maybe again, just focusing on the breath for 3 breaths. And so in that way, if we seed our day with mindfulness, we'll become more in the habit of being more and more mindful throughout the day. Another thing important in the day, as we saw in the last session in these 6 prerequisites, is really to let go of that compulsive thinking that really doesn't serve us and just wastes our life and really causes a lot of agitation as well. And a couple of things we can do there that can be helpful is really to anchor ourselves a little bit in the breath. It's from time to time, really go back into the body and anchor ourselves a little bit in the breath. And also, whenever we're doing any physical activity, be fully present in the senses. So when you're walking down the street or so forth, not to be walking down the street and thinking about all sorts of things, but be fully present in physical activity. So be in the senses when you're doing a physical activity. And so that can help to let go of compulsive thinking as well. And it's also a mindfulness exercise. And as we mentioned just now, when we're faced with difficulties in daily life, to rather see them as opportunities rather than as problems. And then to finish the day on a good note, at the end of the day, one thing we can do that's very helpful, if we have time at the end of the day to do another little meditation session, very good. But at least what we can do before we go to bed is do a little bit of a review of our day. How did our day go? And we can do three things here. First, pick one good thing we did during the day, one positive thing during the day, and really be happy about having done that and make a strong determination to continue to do such good actions the next day. So that will increase our positive habits. And then also pick one not so good thing we did during the day, one negative action, and then really have sincere regret for having done that negative action, and then really make a strong determination to not do that negative thing the following day. And so in that way, we can reduce our negative habits. So that's very good for increasing positive habits and reducing negative habits. And then in addition, I think one thing we can do is think about one thing that we received during the day. And we receive a lot of things during the day, and to have gratitude for that, because we tend to think things, we tend to not be grateful for things. We take things for granted and not appreciate the things that we actually receive in our life, and really to help us develop this mind of gratitude for all the things that we receive. And we receive many things every day. That's going to be very helpful as well. And then the very last thing we can do is, when we go to bed, is use the Shavasana posture as a transition for sleep. So as I mentioned yesterday afternoon, go into the Shavasana posture when you go into bed, and then releasing any tension from the body, releasing any thoughts in the mind. And once you start to get drowsy, then move out of that posture into whatever posture you use for sleep. So that's a good way to finish the day, to transition into sleep. So that's a few things for helping to set up the day. And so what I'd like to do now is, for the meditation, is we've talked a little bit now about these framework. We talked about this shifting our worldview, a view of genuine happiness, what we can bring to the world rather than what we can get from the world, and so forth. And so really then this meditation is about helping us to build a better vision for our life, a better direction for our life. So let's do that practice now, this practice of really setting up a healthy vision for our life, to really think about these sorts of things. So if you'd like to find a nice, comfortable posture, let's begin. As an act of loving kindness for yourself, allow your awareness to descend into the body and simply become aware of sensations throughout the body. And using the out-breath to relax and release any tightness or tension in any part of the body. Allowing the entire body to become completely relaxed. And setting the mind in a state of ease and relaxation. Simply allowing it to come to rest in the present moment. Resting in that stillness. And then we can begin the main practice. Now, no matter how much mental afflictions are in our mind, that is, no matter how much craving and attachment, anger and jealousy, fear and anxiety, and so forth are in our mind, these mental afflictions are not part of the nature of our mind. They're merely like dirt covering the surface of our mind. And beneath these mental afflictions is the natural purity of our mind. This natural purity of our mind is our inner wisdom, our potential to reach the highest goals imaginable. So imagine this inner purity of your mind, this deepest dimension of your mind, in the form of a small, white, radiant sphere of light at the center of your chest, at the level of your heart. And we can begin to build a vision for this life by reflecting on 4 points. And the first point is, what are your deepest aspirations in this life? What is your heart's desire? What would you really like to achieve in this life? So try to picture your deepest aspirations very clearly. And then arouse the thought, may I realize my deepest aspirations in this life. And then with each out-breath, imagine rays of light radiating out from the sphere of light at your heart, filling and saturating your entire body and mind. Imagining that your deepest aspirations are being fulfilled right here and now. And now, in order to help you fulfill your deepest aspirations, what kinds of material assistance would you like to receive from the world around you? And what kinds of friendship and guidance would you like to receive from the people around you? And then arouse the thought, may I receive everything that I need to help me realize those deepest aspirations. And then with each in-breath, imagine reality rising up in the form of white light, streaming in from all directions and providing you with everything you need. Now, the help that we receive from the world around us is not enough for us to realize the genuine happiness that we seek. For this, inner transformation is essential. So the third point to reflect on is, how would you like to transform and evolve as a person? Which faults would you like to be free of? And which qualities would you like to cultivate and fully possess? And then arouse the aspiration, may I cultivate the true causes of my own fulfillment. And then with each out breath, imagine the white light radiating out from your heart, filling your body and mind. Imagining that you're actually becoming that person with those qualities and free of those faults right here and now. And then finally, for the sake of your own fulfillment and to make your life as meaningful as possible, what would you truly love to offer to the world using your own unique talents? And then with each out breath, imagine the white light of loving kindness radiating out in all directions from your heart, actualizing this offering to the entire world right here and now. And then release all appearances and allow the mind to come to rest. And simply rest in that inner purity of mind. Which is in the nature of wisdom and loving kindness and compassion. And so we can bring the meditation to a close. We talked earlier about making our life meaningful, and we talked about how we tend to take our life for granted. And then what often happens, of course, is people have a lot of regrets about their life. And here's a list compiled, maybe many of you have seen this list before, of the top. There was a Australian nurse who was working in the hospice movement for many years, and she would talk to the people she was caring for, the terminally ill people, about their biggest regrets in life. And so over many years, she came up with this list of 5, the top 5 regrets. So I thought they might be useful to know about. The first one is, I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself, not a life expected that others expected of me. On this, and this point, she comments here, she says, this is the most common regret of all. When people realize that their life is almost over and they look back clearly on it, it's easy to see how many dreams have gone unfulfilled. Most people have not honored even half of their dreams and had to die knowing that it was due to the choices they had made or not made. Health brings a freedom very few realize until they no longer have it. So again, as I mentioned earlier, we don't tend to appreciate things until we've lost it or about to lose it. The second point, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. And so here she comments, this came from every male patient that I nursed. They missed their children's youth and their partner's companionship. Women also spoke of this regret, but as most were from an older generation, many of the female patients had not been breadwinners. All of the men I nursed deeply regretted spending so much of their lives on the treadmill of a work existence. And the third one is, I wish I had the courage to express my feelings. And she comments and says, many people suppress their feelings in order to keep peace with others. As a result, they settled for a mediocre existence and never became who they were truly capable of becoming. Many developed illnesses relating to the bitterness and resentment they carried as a result. The fourth one, I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. And she says, often they would not truly realize the full benefits of old friends until their dying weeks, and it was not always possible to track them down. Many had become so caught up in their own lives that they had let golden friendships slip by over the years. There were many deep regrets about not giving friendships the time and effort they deserved. Everyone misses their friends when they're dying. And then the fifth one is, I wish that I had let myself be happier. And she says, this is a surprisingly common one. Many did not realize until the end that happiness is a choice. They had stayed stuck in old patterns and habits. The so-called comfort of familiarity overflowed into their emotions as well as their physical lives. Fear of change had them pretending to others and to themselves that they were content when they were in fact not. So that's the top 5 regrets of people when they're dying. So now we've got some time for question answer, and then there's one more topic after that to look at the upcoming retreats. But if anyone has any questions about this session or any sessions that we've covered in this weekend retreat, please ask now.
Hi, Glenn. Can I comment?
Sorry?
Can I comment something?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay. So thanks a lot for this amazing session. I think the last meditation was amazing. I love the way it was structured. The vision of life is actually taking you through first contemplating and then actually giving you the answers. So really loved it. That end of the day, it's all about happiness and fulfillment. And it is through compassion, selfless, and loving and kindness. So eventually everybody is looking for that end of the day. But we pass through a lot of material aspirations, and that's where probably we get swayed.
Yeah.
And the second thing I wanted to comment was that I wanted to share that I was a little confused as is Shamta and mindfulness is the same thing, or mindfulness is a tool through which we attain Shamata, or Shamata is a tool through which we attain mindfulness. So just if you can just clarify on that.
Sure.
I feel that probably mindfulness is a tool through which we attain calm, abiding mind.
Yeah.
If you can correct me.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this way back in the first session, is that here within Buddhism, mindfulness is a tool. It's actually a mental faculty. It's a tool we use to hold the object. So mindfulness is our faculty of being able to hold the object, to not forget it, to not become distracted. And so with that tool of mindfulness, we develop our attention skills. And then when we develop those attention skills to this point of single pointed concentration, that level of attention skill is called shamatha. So mindfulness is a tool for cultivating concentration and developing those attention skills. So therefore, here we call it shamatha practice because it's the goal that we're trying to achieve, the goal of shamatha. In a lot of modern day traditions, they often talk about mindfulness practice. And here in Buddhism, you wouldn't really see that term mindfulness practice. Rather, we would be saying that we're doing a shamatha practice using mindfulness.
Right. Yeah. So when was this mindfulness word kind of discovered? Because Buddhism doesn't talk about mindfulness. So when is it, at which stage was this added to?
Yeah, no, I mean, of course, originally Buddhism was coming through the Sanskrit and Pali,
Yeah,
but the terms that we use there, smrti and sati, are
yeah,
pretty well mostly translated as mindfulness. So the word mindfulness, the English word mindfulness, has been used for quite a long time as a translation for that term in Sanskrit and Pali. And
okay,
then more recently, then the word mindfulness has been sort of redefined a little bit in some modern mindfulness traditions. And as I mentioned earlier, often the word mindfulness in some modern traditions is defined as often is defined as something like a non-judgmental awareness of whatever is arising in the present moment. And I think,
yeah,
Jon Kabat-Zinn in the mindfulness-based stress reduction
yeah.
is one of the main propagators of that way of defining mindfulness. I think this is uh, uh, probably coming from other commentators as well, but he certainly had a lot of influence in that.
Okay, great. So in the end, if we can, I think if everybody can put their webcams on, and we could have a maybe a screenshot of the everybody who's attended, so we
Yeah,
can
well, we haven't
probably just
finished yet.
share it
I've got some more things to
after.
say yet.
Yes, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions before I go to just to give a little review of the upcoming retreats? Okay, then I'll just briefly look at the upcoming retreats. So the next retreat, each of the retreats now in this series of 5 is spaced 3 weeks apart. So to give us a little bit of time to practice the things that we learned in the previous retreat. So now we can practice the mindfulness of breathing, which is going to be a good basis for the next retreat, because the next retreat is also a shamatha retreat, but here we're going to observe the mind. So there are two very similar practices here. One is to what's called observe thoughts, meaning to observe the mind and whatever's coming up in the mind, thoughts, emotions, and so forth. And the other one is to turn the mind in upon itself and just know that we're aware and just rest in that awareness. And both of those practices, I think, potentially have enormous benefits for us in the modern world. And we'll look at those benefits in that retreat. And also in that retreat, as I mentioned, we're going to continue to look at this 9 stages to shamatha. We've covered the first 4 stages now, and we'll look at the rest of that diagram in that weekend retreat. And also the recommended reading for that retreat is the same book, Attention Revolution. So Alan Wallace talks in some detail about these 2 practices in that book. So if you want to read a little bit about those practices before that retreat, then that would be the best book to read. And then following that, 3 weeks after that, we have a compassion retreat. And compassion here is sort of a generic term, just meaning positive qualities. And there are 4 things that we're focusing on mainly in that compassion retreat: the 4 qualities of loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. How to cultivate those positive qualities. And together with that, we're also going to look at how to deal with anger and attachment, because they can be very harmful and destructive in our life. So some practical ways of looking at those. And then also we'll look at how to transform this self-centeredness, this selfish mind to a mind of cherishing others. And the recommended reading for that retreat is the 4 Immeasurables book from Alan Wallace. He covers a lot of those points there. And then the final 2 retreats, we're going to go into the wisdom practice. And often in Buddhism, the wisdom practice in Sanskrit is called Vipassana practice, in Pali, Vipassana practice, which just means really insight. And so in the first retreat, we're going to be looking at the Vipassana practice, really very much based on the Theravada Buddhist traditions, where they really talk about 3 main insights called the 3 marks of existence. They're going to be insights into impermanence, suffering, and no self. So we're going to be looking at those 3 insights in that weekend retreat. Recommended reading there is another book from Alan Wallace called Minding Closely, the 4 applications of mindfulness. And then the following retreat, the last retreat, again, the Vipassana retreat, and this time we'll be focusing on the insight into emptiness, or in Sanskrit, shunyata. So we'll be looking at this topic of emptiness and the flip side of that, of dependent arising, the idea of interdependence. And within that practice, then we'll be looking at the two main sort of practices that we'll be looking at there is looking at the empty nature of the person, the emptiness of a person. And then also we'll be looking at what's called nature of the mind. A lot of Buddhist traditions focus on that. And for this retreat, a very good book, a recommended reading, is particularly on the topic of emptiness, is How to See Yourself as You Really Are, from His Holiness Dalai Lama. So they are the upcoming retreats that we'll be looking at in every 3 weeks now in the coming weeks. And so that's all I wanted to really cover in this weekend retreat. So again, the next retreat is in 3 weeks' time, the second of the 2 shamatha retreats, observing the mind, using those 2 practices of observing thoughts and resting in awareness. So that's all